Hi there, it's Denise Eckert, and I love coming on here and sharing different techniques and ideas to lower the stress in your life. And today I've got a special guest. His name is Fred Schiffer, and he's a sought-after speaker, best-selling author, psychiatrist, and part-time assistant professor at Harvard. He's on a mission to help people understand their anxiety, addiction, and trauma, and to offer them a proven method to improve their well-being. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. It's good.
Yeah, now I understand you have the dual brain psychology. What inspired you to do this type of work?
I'm a psychiatrist and trained at McLean when in those days it was a psychoanalytic bastion, like all good hospitals. And during the 1980s, there was a revolution to medications and insurance companies like that. But I was trained in Freudian psychology and underwent analysis. But I noticed that people seem to have two different personalities. That when they came in, they were very symptomatic and had an id-like personality, sort of an immature, impulsive, symptomatic personality. And as they got better, they became a different person. They were mature. And then I started rereading the split brain studies of the 1960s that won the Nobel Prize, and didn't really understand the significance of them until I reread it, and that when you cut the connection between the left brain and the right brain in people who have intractable epilepsy as a treatment, you have two different people in one person. And then I wondered whether the two people that I was seeing were related to the two brain hemispheres. And I couldn't really do anything with it until a few years later, a German group of scientists were purporting to show movies to normal people to one brain or the other. And I thought that was impossible because there's a connection between the two brains. And if you show something to one side, it's seen by the other side. But they were saying that they were getting different emotional responses depending on which side they showed it to. And they had must be $1 million machine that they had. I've seen pictures of it, and it would track eye movements and cover the computer screen. And after I read it about 5 times, I realized that they were showing the movie to the lateral visual field. And in the split brain studies, they were aware of the connection between the eyes and the brain. And that if you show something to say, the right visual field over here, only the right brain could see it in split brain patients. And so what the German group was doing was showing the movie to the right visual field or the left visual field. And they were, in a sense, showing it to one brain, the left brain or the right brain, and getting different emotional responses. And after I thought about it, I realized I could do the same thing on my budget by going like this, covering one eye and half the other eye. And I didn't respond. Later I did, and I do now. But I didn't respond to it. But I asked a patient who came in, and he was a Vietnam vet. And I talked about him. He was my first patient that day. And I asked him to do it, and he got very upset. And he said he had been doing well. And he said, that plant behind you looks like the jungle. And he had 4 tours of duty in Vietnam. And he's obviously having a flashback. I said, look out the other side. And he smiled and he said, oh, that's a nice looking plant. And I had about 5 patients that day that had really intense responses like that. And in my practice, about 55% of my patients have these real intense responses. And another 30 have, say, on a 10-point scale, like a 2-point difference, which is clinically significant. And about 15% don't respond. And interestingly, whenever I've tried it with a neurologist, who are uptight people, very serious, and they never respond to this lateral technique. And I never did until I was on vacation with my wife in Italy, and we had a 6-hour drive to the apartment that we rented, and I felt like we were going to crash. And after about an hour, I realized that this was a safe highway. It's just a highway in the United States. And it took about another hour, and I realized that why don't I put my hands up over my eyes? And I did. And all of a sudden, the anxiety went away. So I tried the other side, and I got this boom of anxiety. And it was really interesting. We got to the apartment, and I was up on a balcony, and I'm looking at the road. And if I looked out my right lateral visual field, and you have to use half of one eye, I felt like these cars were going to fly up and hit me. And I said, that's obviously impossible. I said, that's crazy. And on the other side, I felt normal. And so this is dual brain psychology. It's that each hemisphere of the brain can have an independent mind, and one of them has a greater effect with trauma. And it turned out, I didn't realize it at the time, and I had this struggle with myself for over a day to get myself settled and be able to enjoy the vacation. And I realized was that I had a trauma when I was a child, and somebody was bullying me, and they were very cold and threatening. And what I realized was that I had an association with the mafia. And now I had never met an unpleasant person in the US or in Italy. My wife is an Italian American, and I know a lot of Italian people. My unconscious made the association, and that was the cause for this anxiety. And dual brain psychology gives a new understanding of symptoms. And it really covers the whole gamut of whether it's anxiety or depression or addiction. They're all attempts by the troubled mind to remedy the early trauma. And usually the trauma isn't recognized, as in my case. It took, I think it was a year later that I made the connection. And we've studied this at McLean Hospital at Harvard for 30 years, and we've published about 30 papers in support of this idea. So it's the first psychological theory to come out of rigorous science, namely the split brain studies, and to be supported by very serious science at McLean, where we use fMRIs, and an fMRI is an MRI that measures blood flow, and blood flow is an index of brain activity. And we put people in the scanner, had them look out their left visual field and then their right visual field for 30 seconds and then repeat it. And the pictures we got were amazing. That usually these brain images look like measles, so you really can't interpret them well. But here it was easy to interpret because one side was lit up brightly and the other side it looked like a New York blackout. And it reversed when the sides were switched. And again, the eyes are connected to the brain in a known manner that explains why you would stimulate the brain hemisphere. And so we're not only stimulating the brain, but we're eliciting a different mind. And so a patient can look at me out one lateral visual field, and I might look critical, and like maybe his mother was, and he won't like himself, and he might have drug cravings or other symptoms that he came for. And at the other side, I look empathic. I look like a therapist, and he appreciates himself, and his cravings or symptoms remit, and it may go down to zero. This is an overview of what dual brain psychology is. So
Now, if we can just back it up a little bit for our listeners, can you describe the function of the two hemispheres of our brain?
yeah, the hemispheres have some different functions. For example, the speech is almost always, in right-handed people, it always is located in the left brain. And if someone has a stroke in their left brain, they're going to be aphasic or unable to speak or understand language, depending on where the stroke is. There's a common idea that the left brain is more logical and the right brain is more poetic. And the left brain controls the right side of the body, and the left brain left brain controls the right side, and the right brain controls the left side of the body. So if someone has a stroke in one side of the brain, the opposite side can become paralyzed or lack sensation. Now, what I'm doing is something different. It's a metacognition, or it's a higher level. That what I'm doing is stimulating a mind, and I think it has to do with some quantum functions that we won't go into here. But I'm actually talking to two different people, and if I stimulate the right brain, that might be the troubled side, or the left brain might be the troubled side. And neither side in my work is particularly artistic or logical. It's more that one side is healthier and one side is more troubled by past traumas.
So can it be useful for healthy people dealing with stress, your type of dual brain psychology?
Yes, and we can try this with you and we'll see if it. So, do you have an envelope available?
I,
So you want to cover your right eye with
mhm.
the envelope and make it horizontal. Make the envelope horizontal. Good. And move it over so it's head covering half your left eye. There you go. And I want you to think of something, say, moderately upsetting. And I want you to rate your distress from 0 to 10. So it might be 0 or it might be high or whatever. Did you have a reading?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
thinking, yeah, I'm thinking of the homeless situation here in our city lately, and I would say a 9 for
Okay.
distress.
Now I want you to look out the other side. And I want you to think of the same thing and and see what your level of distress is.
Like 0?
I'm sorry.
Like almost a 0. I don't feel that.
Okay. This is dual brain psychology that you're
Okay.
experiencing. And does that surprise you? Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like it
Now,
was almost like the one side I almost felt a panic, and the
yeah,
other side I felt relaxed. So that's a
yeah.
huge difference.
Okay, so that's what this is about. And so, if a patient's in therapy, I have special sunglasses that simulate one side or the other. So it works like the envelope,
Hmm.
and uh, and I can have a conversation with either side, and it's a separate conversation. If someone were walking by who wasn't familiar with what I was doing, they'd think we were crazy. I'm talking to the little boy or little girl. And what I always find is that behind the anxiety or the cravings, whatever comes out on the troubled side, that there's always trauma underneath. And the trauma is usually not recognized by the person initially. And it might be that maybe there was a divorce and they feel like, oh, that happened so long ago, but it may still bother the person. And also, what trauma does is it causes an injury. And then when the person would go to school, they wouldn't do as well because they're traumatized. And then the teacher gets angry with them or they feel stupid. And so they get in with a bad crowd or peers ridicule them. So one trauma leads to another trauma, and then by the time they become adolescents, they are likely to get into alcohol or drugs or flunk out of college. And that becomes a trauma and a humiliation. And most traumas leave a person feeling humiliated. And so I work on the traumas, and I help the trouble side to realize that it really wasn't their fault, and that they were lied to. That if their mother or father was very critical, the parents had the problem, not the child. And it takes a long time, months, to get through to the trouble side. But if you get through to it and you can think about it, the patient can get better. And I try and use the healthy side as a co-therapist. Now, so I call that dual brain psychotherapy, and I want to train other clinicians in that. Now, the people who don't have access to that can use their junk mail. and look out the side that they feel better on. So if they feel particularly anxious, they can use the envelope and look out their good side and actually bring it down and just look at it. The other thing that's really fascinating about it is how quick it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it occurs in seconds.
Yeah. Now, for someone that's interested in finding out more or looking into this for themselves, I understand you have a lot of free information on your website. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so my website is called dualbrainpsychology.com. And I have a new book out. It's called Goodbye Anxiety, Depression, Addiction, and PTSD, The Life-Changing Science of Dual Brain Psychology. And it's available on Amazon, and it just came out. And that's my second book. And that's written for lay people. So it's intended to be an enjoyable read. And it talks about some of the research, but in an easy to understand and interesting manner. And it has vignettes from therapy sessions to show how I would talk with the patient. And they're narrative fiction. So they're accurate depictions of what a therapy session is like, but they're not revealing personal information about patient at all. They're based on real patients, and they gave me permission to use that with changed identifying information.
Congratulations on your book. It sounds amazing, especially just witnessing what I witnessed so easily that it's just incredible information.
Now, I wanted a way to stimulate the brain more intensely. And I went to MGH, which is one of the Harvard hospitals up here, and they have a Wellman Center for photomedicine. And I worked with someone who's an expert but it's now called photobiomodulation. And we developed an LED to put on the forehead. And the light is near infrared light, goes through the skull into the brain and stimulates the mind. So it does what the envelope does, but it's more powerful. And it's a 4-minute treatment. So it's not an instantaneous thing, but patients feel much better with that treatment. And we have a study going. It's our 4th clinical trial using the light for opioid addiction. And right now we have a $2.5 million grant from the National Institute for Drug Abuse, and we have an FDA breakthrough designation. And the Army is applying for a $2 million grant to study depression and combat PTSD using my device. And so this sort of adds so we have a lot of high technology research to support the theory that because it's so unfamiliar, sounds weird. And
Well, that's a lot of exciting stuff you've got on the table there. That's amazing.
yeah.
So we're going to be wrapping this up. So what are your final words of wisdom out for the audience today?
Be aware that there might be a traumatized little boy, little girl inside, and that try to get to know them and use your junk mail.
Okay, wherever you're watching or listening to this, I will be putting Fred's information there, his links and his contact information. So if you have any questions, please reach out and ask your question. Thank you so much, Fred, today. This was a mind-blowing experience, and I wish you the best on the book. And yeah, thank you so much for being here and sharing this amazing information.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Leaving you a gentle reminder to slow down and enjoy life, and I'll see you in the next episode.